What is a ghost business and how can you create one and pay virtually zero in taxes? Now, I know this sounds crazy, right? If this was possible, wouldn't everyone do it? Wouldn't literally everyone do it? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Depends on your situation. But I would buckle up, and you're definitely going to want to watch this whole video because I'm going to break down some stuff I guarantee you have not heard. And we're going to talk about how you can actually start Operation Ghost Business. Now, I did a video on this a couple of months ago, so I recommend you check that. I'll link it in the cards because I talked about a couple of topics in that video that I'm not going to touch on today, real beginner level stuff. And so it's worth giving that video a watch as well. Now, if you haven't already, check out the first link down below. I have some really in-depth training that teaches you exactly how to build your business online and create a ghost business and live an anonymous life, which is really, really important. And we're going to talk about why. Some of you think I have nothing to hide, I have no reason to do this. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. We're going to break that down and then you be the judge. But check out the first link down below. The sale I have is ending very, very soon, so only a couple more days to grab that before we shut the doors. But let's go into Operation Ghost Business. Now, what is a ghost business? Well, ultimately, what you're trying to do is avoid a couple of things. Frivolous lawsuits, unnecessary taxes, unnecessary, and you're trying to set up a structure where you can protect yourself. Most businesses are extremely exposed. And we're going to talk about a few things you could, should, and probably want to do. We're going to work in reverse. Now, a lot of people talk about, well, how do I pay less or no taxes? If you're an employee, it's not an option. It's just not an option. So the first thing you need is a business. Now, you might be thinking, well, Cody, I've got a really good job. Well, maybe you do, you probably don't. But let's just pretend you do. Even if you have a job, you can start a side business. Okay, you can start a business on the side. There's a lot of doctors and lawyers and people in really good jobs, even pro athletes who have side businesses. What this allows you to do is take full advantage of the tax code. Understand that the tax code in America is written by criminals. Congress is mostly run by criminals, and they put in tons of loopholes for themselves, and then us little people like me and you get to use them as well because they can't exclude us no matter how hard they try. So the good news is if you can understand the tax code, which almost nobody can, you can get an accountant who probably can understand some of it, then you can take full advantage. Now, you've really only got about 6 big tax loopholes if you don't have a business. But if you have a business, you literally could have hundreds depending upon how your business is structured and the corporate structure. Now, I recommend an LLC, and in the previous ghost video, I talk about why you should do a Wyoming LLC for anonymity and why you should do a holding company, or what I call a ghost holding company, which what this allows you to do is it allows you to control everything, own nothing, okay? Control is much more valuable than ownership. I want you to understand that ownership is a myth. If you own a car but don't buy tabs, don't do emissions, that car is basically a paperweight for your driveway. You can own it, but it can also be worthless. And actually, do you know that you can own a car, but if you don't get tabs, it can be towed? That is a law in almost every city. So if you take your car that you own, they can impound and take your car because you didn't buy the stickers that they mandate you have. It gets worse. You can own a home, flat out. But if you don't pay taxes, they will seize the home. There's been people who've had homes seized for a few grand that they've owned outright, because you never actually own it. And I hate to tell you guys, but you've been sold a lie. The American dream is literally 100% a lie. You're never going to own anything, but you can control everything. So the first thing you want to do is create a Wyoming LLC and then ultimately a parent company. Now, with a lot of my clients in the privacy niche, I work with a lot of really successful people that build huge businesses, and I help them structure this in a way that gives them privacy and anonymity. So it goes much deeper than that, but if you're new, starting with a Wyoming LLC is a good option. And I've got videos here on this channel that show you how to do that, so check it out. The next thing you want to look at is location. So in the United States of America, and this is probably true if you're a viewer from Canada or Australia or somewhere in Europe or South Africa or wherever it may be, Asia. In America, we have what's called a domicile. Now, how do you figure out your domicile? Well, easy. Where's your driver's license or ID issued? So we have well, that's not true. There's two formal ID for the average citizen. There's other things like military ID, but the average person's not in the military. But typically, you've got a driver's license hyphen ID card. Some people who don't have a driver's license, you still can go get an ID card. You, of course, pay a fee and get the ID, which they want you to have because you got to put your information in, which is a whole nother topic, which I do not recommend you do. And I talk about how you can get around putting no information in an ID or driver's license because those databases are readily available. That's what a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand how readily available all of your information is through a couple keystrokes and a $29.99 a month subscription. It is ridiculous. At Privacy X, I got a bunch of software and services we use where I literally could track just about anybody in the world. It's scary what's possible for a couple of bucks. So what you want to make sure you do is you're going to have two options. You're going to have your driver's license, and then you can have a passport. Good thing about a passport is a passport's not going to have your domicile because a passport domiciles you for the United States, which is the way that it should be, mind you, but it's not. Now, there are a lot of different options for different domiciles. Basically, it's where you live for most of you. So if you live in Colorado and you have a Colorado driver's license, you're an American citizen via Colorado. Now, you see a lot of people with the nomad lifestyle and the van life lifestyle, and you hear a lot of people getting domiciles like in South Dakota and different places where it makes a lot of sense for tax purposes, and it makes a lot of sense for a whole bunch of reasons to have a domicile over there, as opposed to having a domicile in a garbage state like, I don't know, California, New York, etc. So what happens is, for a lot of us, we'll have a domicile in a really poor state. Well, there's only a couple of states you want to have your domicile in. I'm going to name them for you right now. Nevada, Texas, Florida, Wyoming, South Dakota. Those are the only states I would recommend having your domicile in. Now, you'll notice there's no state income tax, which is one of the first things if you're an entrepreneur and a business owner. Now, there are a couple other states that don't have state income tax, like, for example, the state of Washington. The state of Washington is one of the biggest piles of garbage in the United States of America. In fact, if we got rid of one state, my vote would be Washington and probably Oregon. So, beautiful places. I grew up over there. Garbage. It's ran like garbage. It makes California look good. They are communist. They are... Jay Inslee thinks he's a freaking king. It is incredible. So, no, I do not recommend those states. So, those are the 5 key states. Why are those 5 key states? Well, there's 3 fundamental reasons. We talked about the income tax. Again, there are other states that are kind of on the border. Tennessee is a pretty good one. It's not great. There's some problems with Tennessee, but it's pretty good. There are a few others that are pretty good, but they're not great, and that's why they don't make my top 5 list. And there's a lot of beautiful states in the United States, but those are the 5 I recommend having your domicile. And if you can live in one of those 5 states, all the better. Obviously, Texas and Florida are blowing up right now with everything that's going on in the world. Our housing has tripled over here in, I spend a chunk of my time in Las Vegas. I live in Las Vegas part of the year, and Las Vegas has been blowing up. Texas is blowing up. Florida's blowing up. Even Wyoming and South Dakota and Utah, Colorado, like this whole interior, because of things that are going on. And then the next issue you want to have when you have your ghost business is you want to understand the business and litigation laws for your state. Now, understand in the United States of America, everything supersedes to federal, okay? Federal can overpower state and local anytime they want to, basically. It's not always common unless it's a big deal, but it can happen. Now, federal isn't as big of a concern as state and local, so you need to understand if it is a business-friendly state. Those 5 states I just recommended are incredibly business-friendly. So not only do they have no state income tax, they're incredibly business-friendly, which is another reason why states like Washington and Tennessee don't make my top 5. While Washington has no state income tax and Tennessee's kind of in a gray area, there's a couple other business issues where I don't pick those states. Washington is great for corporations. Obviously, it's got some of the biggest ones in the world, like Amazon, Starbucks, Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of issues if you're not a big corporation. The next thing you need to look at is you need to look at the overall market. Now, if you're doing a business online, you're not so worried about the current economy. So if you're living in a place like South Dakota or Wyoming, which are both incredible places, South Dakota has a great poker circuit. I play poker at a very high level in Vegas, and South Dakota has great poker. They have great smaller towns, but you don't have to live off the economy if you start your own online business, which is an incredible thing. You can live in remote Montana or remote South Dakota or remote, insert wherever. You could go live in Vermont or Maine and live off the land, or live in Wisconsin or whatever it is, and not have to live off the economy. Now, I've got a whole checklist of things that I go over before I pick one of these, which is what I go over with my clients. I can't go over everything in this video, but what I will tell you is these are a couple things you want to take into consideration. Now, the next thing you want to look at when you're setting up a ghost business is the overall tax burden that you're required based on your income tax level. Now, your accountant can help you with your income tax level because he or she probably knows your bracket. So how do people like Peter Schiff and Logan Paul, for example, there's actually a lot of celebrities who do this too, pay no taxes? Well, step one for most of them is move to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a United States territory, and it is a place where you can pay almost no taxes at all. You do have to live there for over 6 months. So when I mentioned domicile, and I talked about those places, one thing you have to keep in mind is the United States bases that off where you spend the most of your time, and you're supposed to spend at least 6 months in a specific area. Now, you might not. That's why people like van life and nomadic type people who are living in tiny houses, but they're traveling around, or they're moving the house around, or they're living in RVs, etc. They'll pick a domicile, and if you're from California, you would be insane to keep that domicile if you're like a van life type person, because that's one of the worst options. You have the highest taxes, you have some of the worst litigation, you have some of the worst laws, you have some of the worst of everything. It makes no sense. Like when you start a business. If you live in New York and start a business in New York, there's no reason you would ever get a New York LLC. That's one of the worst things you could do. But a lot of people do it because they don't have the education and the business acumen to figure these things out. And next thing you know, they've got a New York LLC. Or even worse, a New York holding company, which is notorious for piercing the corporate veil, which is horrible. That's why you do not want to do these type of things. That's why a lot of people will use Wyoming, Delaware for corporations. Nevada has a good LLC. New Mexico has always had a very strong anonymity LLC, although there is laws challenging it. They've always had some pretty good stuff. So those are just to name a few. There's a handful of other states that are really good. But the last thing you want to do is use a state like Washington, Oregon, California, New York, Connecticut. I mean, these places are horrible for businesses, and they make everything miserable. They're all, beautiful states, but they make everything miserable for entrepreneurs and business people. So that's what you want to keep in mind when you're getting that started. Now, living in Puerto Rico, you can side skirt a lot of these things. Now, you might be thinking, well, moving to Puerto Rico is not an option. I know it's not an option. It's not an option for me either, because it's not the life I want to live. Puerto Rico is a beautiful place, but it's not the life I want to live, and it's not the life I'm going to raise my kids in. So moving to Puerto Rico for me is not an option. It might be an option for you. Okay, I don't want that life for my kids. I have a different idea of what I'm doing, so it's not for me. But if it's for you, that could solve a lot of your problems if you can afford to live in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is an option because your tax burden is going to be lower than that of some third world countries. It's incredible the stuff an accountant could do. So how do you get around a lot of this? Well, when you're in business, and nowadays with social media, now I'm not giving you business or financial advice, but I will tell you that you can write off almost everything. Literally, almost everything. And you could use for business expenditures. I mean, the average YouTuber writes off almost their entire life. One of the main reasons people do YouTube, you see, businesses are not about profit. It's about the pursuit of profit. So when you read the IRS tax code, you can actually, some of the most successful people have a day job and they start a side business and they really try to make money. They try hard, but the business loses money. I've seen people who make $100 grand a year who actually get massive refund checks because their business took a loss, and then the overarching, they buy everything, right? New cameras, new cars, new equipment, pay for trips, hotels. You write off everything, and you puts you in a very good place financially from a tax standpoint. In fact, in a lot of ways, it makes sense to buy businesses and equipment and things like that when you start becoming successful. I mean, that's something I've focused on for years now, is I have to buy more stuff so I don't owe the government more money. You go out, buy a business, buy a truck, buy equipment. I mean, I one time set up a music studio, a whole music studio that cost me thousands and thousands of dollars to make beats for some YouTube videos, and I wrote it all off, right? Just giving you one example. I spent like 10 grand on music equipment, and I wrote all of it off because I made some beats for some YouTube videos. That's all legal. It goes through the IRS. The IRS is like, cool story. Where you really get hosed is if you work a job because you don't get any of these benefits. Now, don't get me wrong, entrepreneurs get hosed. We have to pay a lot if we're not smart about it. And even being smart about it, I still pay more in taxes than most people. But I'm taking the benefits possible. And this is what you need to keep in mind. You're basically just playing the game they set forth. Some people will be like, well, moving to Puerto Rico, that's not fair. There's no such thing as fair. Life's not fair. You need to decide and make a choice of what you're going to do and then go out and do it. And just sitting around being like, well, that's not fair, is not going to work. So if you're starting a ghost business, and at this point, I consider, with what's happening in the world, I would never start a business the rest of my life without it being a ghost business. I would never structure anything the traditional way again, because the political climate, the social media climate, the BS litigation climate, the BS cancel culture climate, for all the good that some of these things created, it's created 1,000 times more bad. And for the average person, it's just a bunch of garbage, and it doesn't make any sense, that's why I've pivoted everything into this. Now, I've been a major privacy advocate for over a decade. I talk about some of my struggles with identity theft in my podcast, the privacyxpodcast.com. You can check it out. I really get deep into some of my downfalls and struggles 10, 12 years ago, and why I got so heavy into privacy and anonymity. I mean, I've been doing this stuff way before I was ever on YouTube, and how it's helped me. So it's something to look at. Now, you might be thinking, well, if I don't move to Puerto Rico, is there a way to get similar taxes? Not really, because Puerto Rico is, again, tax burden. So you need to look at your liability for where you are. So you take someone like Logan Paul, that guy makes millions of dollars, and moving to Puerto Rico, he basically just kept a few million, especially when he's fighting Floyd Mayweather and he's doing these big ticket things that are going to make him millions and millions of dollars. He just put tons of extra money in his pocket. Good for him. Because the state of California is one of the worst tax states in this country, and the way Logan Paul would be taxed is astronomical. So by moving his domicile, keep in mind, he still has a residence in California, but he moved his main domicile to Puerto Rico, filed the paperwork. Now his tax burden is not even a micro fraction of what it was. And so he basically effectively held on to millions and millions and millions of extra dollars. Smart. The guy's smart. It was the right thing to do. It was the right move for this point in his life. Peter Schiff, that guy does a similar type of thing. He doesn't spend as much time in Puerto Rico consistently. He claims he spends 6 months a year there. Whether he does or not really doesn't matter because it's not a monitored thing. Peter Schiff could do whatever he wants. His domicile is still Puerto Rico. He still owns a house in Puerto Rico, and he still pays almost no taxes because of it. Now, one of the biggest things in ghost businesses, we're talking about crypto, we're talking about gold and silver, we're talking about dollar. The biggest thing to get away from is digital transactions in their native form. So, you know, some payment processors are better than others, and I'm going to do a video soon on how to do things as anonymous as possible using payment processors, because online businesses, ultimately, you're going to have to process payments. One of the companies I think is the biggest piece of garbage on the internet is PayPal, and I left PayPal a few years ago. I haven't used PayPal in years, and I will never use PayPal again. But there are some processors better than others, so I'm going to break that down in a future video. But I wanted to kind of talk about why you should start a ghost business, how you can get started, and how you should start thinking about taxes. For most of you, if you restructure some paperwork, depending upon your situation, you could save crazy amounts of money just by restructuring your life and business on paper. A lot of you don't understand that you can do most of this on paper, and this is what I structure for a lot of my clients and help them build out this structure. Now, ultimately, there's a million things you could do, and each situation is different, but my goal for this video is just to get you thinking, because I get people coming to me every day, you know, Cody, what do I do? I'm in this scenario, and a lot of people don't understand you have options. Like in America, you have a lot of options, so keep that in mind. Anyway, appreciate you guys checking out this video. If you haven't already, make sure you check out the first link down below. Again, that's ending soon, and you do not want to miss it. I go deep in a lot of stuff. Have an amazing day, guys. Go all in everything you do, and I'll see you in the next video.